kinda here.
Found out in 5th grade that there's more than one way to summon Bloody Mary. You don't have to be in a bathroom or even inside. The girls in my 5th grade class at recess decided to do it, myself included, though I didn't really think it would work. It didn't matter why I believed apparently, because it did. We created 4 circles by standing in a circle and joining hands. We then moved/spun to our right while chanting Bloody Mary. On the 3rd time saying her name, we all closed our eyes. For me, it was involuntary. And we were all knocked to the ground. And knocked out for varying lengths of time, all 4 circles. All of us having seen her. She didn't look like she was there at the playground, at least not to me, but somewhere else. It's hard to describe where she was at, and I don't really want to. Anyway, we discovered that we all saw her in somewhat different scenarios. Some of us heard her talk, but barely saw her. Others saw her in places they recognized, but heard nothing. We only realized all this once every girl was awake again though. Some were more freaked out than others, thanks to a few being hurt. Some of us were only out for a second, while others were out long enough to draw the teacher's attention. It was really freaky, and I'll never forget it. Nor do I think the other girls will. I will never summon her again. Every time I hear or read her name, that day comes back to me. I wasn't hurt. I didn't see her anywhere I recognized. I didn't hear anything but wind when I saw her. But what I did see freaked me out way too much. It will be a while yet before I can really describe her, and the place she was at. I'm just happy that I'm not the girl whose idea it was to summon her, or the 2 girls who claimed she didn't exist right before they did it with us. They got the worst of it. Take these experiences as a warning. Don't do something you're not prepared for. If you want to do something like this, do your research first, and make sure you actually want to do it and can do it safely. Don't be stupid and act foolishly for your own sake and for others. This is not the first ritual that I've done. I've tried several more here, as well as spells and things that I've picked up from other places. But enough about those. This post will take long enough to read without all the extra fluff. I had heard of this ritual and actually read the original post. I thought it was interesting, but had also passed it off, due to there being no real reward at the end or really any known purpose, and not having any idea as to what could happen among other things that have to do with my dreams, etc. Those will be explained and mentioned further on. I did this about a week ago. I usually wouldn't have had a good place to do it, due to living in a 60-ish year old house that has no basement, storm cellar, etc. But we have a large back room which we keep empty except for our washer and dryer, which we had moved out due to getting new flooring the next day. The night before, I got plenty of sleep to ensure that I wouldn't accidentally fall asleep mid-ritual. That day, I was at the store with a friend and went ahead and picked up one of those Catholic candles. It was all we could find at the time, and a box of matches to ensure that nothing would go wrong with a lighter. At around 11 that night, I moved the needed chairs, mirrors, etc. into the room. I also covered the 2 windows in the rooms with thick towels that I nailed into place. I went to bed holding my power object, a teddy bear that was given to me by my mum. I woke up at exactly 3:30 and was seated in the correct space in probably less than a couple of minutes. The fan was cold, even though it was only on low, so I sat there for a few minutes, shivering and clutching my power object and my candle until I felt movement in the darkness around me. Honestly, I felt like 2-ish presences were coming from the backyard behind me. This room has a door that goes to our backyard, and each one sat down in the chairs on either sides of me. As they moved, I began to feel very uneasy, a feeling I get when I'm around certain places. Usually either haunted places or places where a person died or something terrible happened. Also, for some reason, I felt like the presence on my left had a more dominant presence or vibe than the one on my right. As far as I know, nothing really happened. I occasionally felt as if the two presences were whispering. Maybe about me, maybe not. I couldn't pick up what they were saying, but it almost felt as if they were one of those groups of people that talk about you as you walk past, that we all have run into at high school. This is when it gets scary. The next thing I knew, I was screaming and shaking. My best friend, my backup person, had come in and thrown the water over my head. Apparently, I'd been found staring straight ahead with a look of pure terror on my face. I went back to bed after drying off. That night, I had the most horrible nightmares I've ever had. The dreams I usually have are usually on the bizarre side and are somewhat lucid, but this one was like no other. In my dreams, I was back in that room, back in that chair, while the two presences that I had experienced slowly tortured me with my fears. I don't recommend anyone try this, and if you do, don't go back to sleep when you're done. Have you ever heard about the Midnight Game? It's a ritual game where you perform a ritual to summon an entity called the Midnight Man and basically play hide and seek until 3:33 a.m. Except if you were caught, you may lose your mind or something like that. I had played plenty of these kind of ritual games with little to no success. A couple of them did have slightly creepy results, but nothing to make me take them for their word. They would always exaggerate the danger and what would happen, but it was always kind of hyped up. As I said, I have had a couple of slightly creepy results which I may write about later, but nothing to deter any future endeavors. What attracted me to this one was the number of warnings and cautionary tales. Plus, there was no benefit to winning it. It was all for the thrill, which I was into. How I wish now I wasn't. I won't go into the full details, of course, because I don't want responsibility for anything that may happen, but the gist of it is this. Perform a small ritual involving your name, blood, a candle, and knocking. With all the lights in your house off, the only light you can have is the candle. Once the ritual is complete, you take and relight the candle and wander around your dark house, avoiding the Midnight Man. Ways to tell the Midnight Man is near: a drop in temperature, hearing soft whispering from indiscernible source, seeing a pure black humanoid through the darkness, and worst of all, your candle goes out. If this happens, you have 10 seconds to relight before the Midnight Man attacks. When the Midnight Man is near, you need to leave the area. The game is played from 12 midnight exactly until 3:33 a.m. No later, no earlier. To me, it sounded like people wandering around in the dark scaring themselves, but that was what I was into at the time, so I decided to do it the next chance I got. Another rule was that you had to be alone. If anyone was in the house sleeping, you were putting them in danger. So I had to wait until my parents went away for the weekend, which they did sometimes, but I'd have to wait. My chance finally came. My parents were traveling to the next state over for one of Dad's friends' weddings, so I got all the materials I needed and planned to do it that Saturday night. I got everything ready for the ritual and timed it so the last knock would be at midnight as per the instructions. After I'd finished the last part, I felt a chill go up my spine and my hairs stood on end. I felt kind of panicked and quickly grabbed my candle and moved to a different area of the house. Like, I felt a real sense of fear and dread. I had never felt this in any of the other ritual games I had played. I even felt kind of sick in my stomach and almost regretted starting it. I just guessed I had read too much into it and was freaking myself out, but continued the game. Then, roughly 30 minutes in or so, my candle suddenly went out. I've never felt so sick and panicked to get my lighter to relight it as quickly as I could, whilst moving to a different area of the house. This was no small feat, especially with shaking hands, but I managed to do it within the 10 seconds I had to do so. I was in the living room, crouching behind the sofa. I then felt the temperature start to drop, and I realized how futile hiding was while holding a candle in the dark. I just had to keep moving. I glanced at my watch. It was 12:43 a.m. Still just under 3 hours to go. I wasn't sure how much more of this I could take. There was no convincing myself I was imagining things. This was real. At that moment, I really started to regret my decision to fool around like this. I kept moving slowly through my house. I was in the hallway that connected the living room to the bedrooms and bathroom now. Just had to keep moving. At times I thought I saw something in the corners of my vision, so I made sure not to go in that direction. All seemed to have calmed down now, and I was starting to wonder what I was so scared of, but I still didn't stop moving. I was passing through the hallway again, this time heading towards the living room. Then I started hearing whispering. I couldn't make out what it was saying, but I knew I had to get out of there. I tried to listen to see which direction it was coming from, but I couldn't pinpoint it. It just seemed to be coming from everywhere. As cliche as it is, I can honestly say my blood ran cold. Just as I was desperately trying to decide which way to go, the whispering suddenly was in my left ear. That made my decision for me. I ran as fast as I could in the opposite direction whilst keeping the candle lit. I hid until I couldn't hear it anymore, and then resumed my wandering. It is advised against staying still. I want to say that I definitely saw something, or had some kind of dramatic encounter, but really, it was much more of the same until it was finally 3:33 a.m. It felt like I had been in the dark forever, but it was finally over. I wanted to sleep and just forget about my night and rest, but sleep would not come. Every time I tried to sleep, I thought I could hear the whispering, and then upon awakening, I thought I could see movement in the shadows. I finally slept once I could see the first light from the sunrise. Actually, I was like this for about 2 to 3 months after the ritual. I guess it was from trauma or something like that. Of all the rituals to have worked, I wish it was one which I could have gained something other than PTSD. So, I'm not really sure if there's any point in talking about this, but I thought I might as well. It's probably been 2 years since then. I had been browsing no sleep as usual, making myself a little anxious. Nothing particular caught my eye until I read about Hitori Kakurembo, or one-man hide-and-seek, a Japanese ritual, also called hide-and-seek alone. I read about a girl's encounter. The game allows you to play hide-and-seek with a spirit possessing a doll. A bit spooked, I thought that maybe I could play with a friend. I made my way to my neighbor Victoria's house, and she agreed to try the ritual with me. I bought a stuffed doll from the dollar store to use, and I yanked the stuffing out. She helped me fill it with rice and sew it shut with the red thread, and we giggled at the floppy doll. "We'll have to wait until later tonight to try this," I told her. She whined, obviously wanting to do it right then. "Come on, let's go mess with our sisters or something." Okay. We glanced over at my pool to see our younger sisters playing in it. I looked down at the doll in my hand. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Yeah. We slowly crept up, not making a sound. I threw the doll in the pool with a splash, and I heard my sister make a noise of confusion. What was that? Oh my god! Victoria's sister screamed, throwing the doll at my face. We laughed for about 5 minutes before joining them in the pool. "Wait a minute," I said half an hour later. "Where's the doll?" "Aiden, what did you do?" "What did I do? I threw it at you." "I thought you had it," Victoria shouted at Megan. "Did it sink?" We frantically searched the water, finding nothing. I jumped out, looking through the short, freshly cut grass. "Not here either." "What the hell?" Victoria whispered. "Where did it go?" I shrugged, feeling more than a little uneasy. As I said before, this was 2 years ago. We never saw that doll again, so we never carried out the ritual. I think it was for the best. So I played the midnight game a few months ago, and ever since, it's been a bit different in my house. I played this game by myself, which definitely made things extra creepy, so maybe some of these things could have been my imagination, but some of it I really can't explain. I'll be writing this as accurately as possible, with timestamps to roughly match, if my memory doesn't fail me. 11:55 to 11:59 p.m. I begin to grab everything I need. Not much special here. Though one thing people didn't tell me was that it's pretty nerve-wracking when you're just about to do these things. I find that especially notable considering I never really feel scared by things. Anyways, I write my name, use the needle, and commit to the game by knocking on the door 22 times. I like to think I set it up pretty well, because I got the 20-second knock right as it hit midnight. 12 to 12:25 a.m. Nothing much interesting happens here, but I figured I'd include it anyway, as it's definitely an important part of the game. I'm fairly cautious when attempting more risky tasks such as this, but aside from the atmosphere and maybe a shadow here and there, it's just me and the darkness around me. 12:30 a.m. My candle went out for the first time. Didn't spend too long relighting it, but I can't think of anything that could have put it out like that. 12:35 a.m. This is when I start getting more comfortable with the game, and I finally try something stupid. I decide to drop my candle off somewhere and walk around in the dark. I walk into my kitchen, candleless, and immediately everything is already off. I begin to feel this sharp pain in my waist, almost as if I was being stabbed or something. Noped right out of there after that. 1 to 2 a.m. After my kitchen incident, I decide to be a bit more careful with the game, while still trying little things to amuse myself. I mean, come on, it's boring walking around in the dark for 3 hours. I keep making sure the salt is where I left it, ironically, being in the same room as the incident from before. 2:22 a.m. I begin to head upstairs in my stroll around the house, when I look up at the top of the staircase from halfway up. That's when I see it. I couldn't quite see much up there, but I'm pretty sure I could see a large shadowy mass taking up space next to one of the bedrooms. I don't know if it saw me, but I don't think I stuck around to find out. I just decide to avoid upstairs for the rest of the game. 2:40 a.m. Candle goes out once again while I was sitting on the couch. But here's the catch. The candle refused to light. Luckily, I had a bag of them not too far from me, so I didn't have much trouble with the candle after this point. Still, no idea why it wouldn't light though. After that, not much happens in the game, but I did bring up that things have been different since my playthrough. They're small things, but are still very noticeable to me, such as seeing things in the dark. One instance I can still remember is seeing a cat in the dark walking up the stairs. I thought it was one of my own and simply walked past it. However, when I went to the bottom of the stairs, I saw both my cats in the room across. The one on the stairs even made little noises such as footsteps, which just makes everything extra weird. Anyway, that's about it for my experience. Thoughts? When I was around 12 or 13, My sister and I came across a game when we visited my cousins in Mexico. It's basically a game that connects you with the other side, and you can communicate with a good or bad spirit. It's called the Red Book game. I had no idea what I was getting myself into, so I decided to play. It was a very freaky experience. I believe whatever spirit we were communicating with attached to us in a negative way. Fast forward, we went back home after a week in Mexico, and it was summertime. I used to stay up late with my sister, Jess, and cousin, Betty, until 2 or 3 in the morning, playing board games or watching movies. One particular night, we were playing a game, and it was about 2 in the morning. We heard a slight knock on the door. I went to go open it, and there was no one there. We thought it was our younger sister, Ash, playing a prank on us, so we didn't think anything of it. A couple of minutes later, we heard 3 knocks, but this time, it was louder. I went to go open it again, and no one was there. At this point, we were afraid and debating on who should go downstairs to check if it really was my sister pranking us. As we were talking, again 3 knocks. I quickly opened the door, and no one was there. We all decided to go downstairs to check if anyone was awake. My parents were asleep, my grandma was asleep, and my little sister was also asleep. We ran back up the stairs because we were horrified. As we were talking about the knock, we heard a large slam coming from downstairs. We had no idea what it was. Betty and Jess made me go check, of course, because I was the youngest, and it was our chimney protector that had flung itself across the room. My dad came out mad because he had work the next morning. He inspected the area to see what could have caused the fall. He was surprised because it is a pretty large and heavy object, but didn't believe it fell by itself and made us go to sleep. That was my first paranormal experience of many. Now, this story I'm about to tell is my most creepiest and worst experience I had. After my first paranormal experience, odd things would happen, such as random things missing that I'd just put down, things falling off the counter, frequent arguments and fights between my sisters and I, as if there was a really negative energy present in the house. I always felt like I was being watched. I never slept with the lights off because I felt like I was not alone. One particular summer night, Jess, Betty and I were watching a show. Jess and Betty were sitting on one sofa facing the TV, and I was sitting on the single chair sofa. We heard a sudden growl. It sounded like a wild pig growl coming from our backyard. We did not live in a ranch. We lived in the city, so we found that really strange. Jess paused the TV to see if we could hear it again, but there was no growl. We opened the window to see if it was maybe a stray dog, but there was nothing. We all sat back down and continued to watch the show, when I felt a sudden hair pull. It was so aggressive, my neck snapped back and hit the staircase. I shouted in anger because I thought it was my little sister messing with me. When I turned around, I saw a little human with pitch black straight hair, straight bangs, pale skin and a faint smile. I'm getting chills just typing this. I quickly turned back around and jumped all the way to the sofa with Betty and Jess. I don't know how I jumped 5 feet from one sofa to the next, but I did after I saw that. My sister, Jess, sat there in horror, shocked at what she saw, and we all ran upstairs to the room. Betty did not know what was going on because she was watching the TV, but Jess claimed she saw when my hair was pulled. Of course, I did not want to sleep alone that night, so all 3 of us tried to sleep in a twin bed. Jess was charging her phone, and her charger has a bright blue light, so it was lighting up the room. I couldn't get to sleep, so I was staring at the walls of the room. In the corner of my eye, I saw something moving. I glanced and noticed the drawer was slowly opening. I kicked Jess and Betty so they would wake up and told them the drawers were opening. We all lay there in horror, watching the drawers open one by one. We hid under the covers and planned to make a run for it. I got the nerve to get up and run towards the door. The door was stuck. It wouldn't open. We were all crying in horror trying to get out, and Betty forced the door open after what seemed like forever. My parents came out of their room, and we couldn't even talk to tell them what happened. After we explained to my parents about the drawers opening, we went with my dad to show him. The drawers were all open. They were all opened in an even manner. He made us go to church and get blessed the next day. The priest also came over to bless the house. This is the second creepiest encounter, the woman in black. After the house was blessed, paranormal activity was still occurring. We were seeing black shadow figures run from one room to the next. We were hearing noises of someone running from one place to the next. When we were downstairs, we would hear someone jumping on the beds upstairs when we knew no one was there. I feel like this entity would mostly pick on my sister and I. My parents would see weird things happen, but they wouldn't tell us because they didn't want to frighten us. This one particular night, I was laying on the sofa watching a movie with my sister Jess. It wasn't too late because my parents were still awake in their room. Our living room is attached to the kitchen, so I was laying on the sofa facing the staircase, and Jess was laying on the other sofa facing directly towards the TV. After the movie finished, the credits came on, so it was pretty dark in the living room. The hallway light was on, so I can still see the glare in the kitchen. We were too lazy to get up and get the remote to change the TV, so we were just talking. We then got interrupted by a sudden laughter. It sounded just like my mum's laugh, as if the entity was mocking her sound. My mum has a habit of scaring us all the time, since we would stay up really late, so we thought it was her. "Stop scaring us, Mum, we know it's you." Silence. No response. "Mum, is it you?" Still no response. My sister Jess and I were debating on who should get up and turn the lights on. We were too afraid, since the living room was so dark, and the light switches were located by the kitchen, so it was a walking distance to get there. I got the courage to get up and turn them on. As I was walking towards the light switch, I saw a black figure, definitely a woman, standing in the corner of the kitchen. You can see she had a black veil over her face and was wearing a big black laced dress. She had a smile on her face, as if she was laughing or giggling. I quickly looked away and ran to my parents' room, and my mum was still awake watching TV. My sister Jess followed behind me. She saw the glare of my figure on the TV. Of course, my parents only said, "Stop watching scary movies and go to sleep." Because of that experience, I've never seen that movie, The Woman in Black or The Conjuring. They came out a year or two after that experience. The entity I saw resembled those ladies in the black dress. One weekend, my parents had left to Houston for a mini vacation. They left my two older sisters in charge of the house. My sister Jess, Annette, my niece, and I were gathered at the kitchen table talking about the creepy encounters that were occurring around the house. At the time, the negativity in the house was horrid. It felt like you were being watched by something everywhere you went. We did not want to be in the house at all. As we were chatting, we got interrupted by a noise coming from my parents' room. It sounded like something fell. My parents' room is right next to the kitchen/living room area, so we definitely knew that sound came from their room. We all laughed nervously, thinking maybe it was just something outside. A few minutes pass, and we hear the same noise. It sounded like there was something jumping off the bed and landing on their feet. "What the hell is that? Go check," I tell my sister Jess. We were all too scared to check, so we just stayed put, hoping we didn't hear it again. Shortly afterwards, someone was banging on the door of my parents' room. The doorknob was rattling and pulling very forcibly, as if someone was trying to open the door. My niece was 2 at the time. The knocks were so loud she started crying. We quickly ran out of the house. We thought someone might have broken into my parents' room. We called my parents right away and asked them if they locked their room door or left any windows open. They are certain they locked their door and made sure windows were locked before they left. I believed it because my dad is the overprotective type. He always triple checks everything before he leaves, especially when he goes out of town. Wait, no. Someone can't break in from the inside of a room. Why would they be tugging at the door from inside the room? It makes no sense, I told my sisters, as we were standing outside. We decided to go inside and check. I had 911 on speed dial, ready to call if anything bad happened. My parents' door was unlocked. We opened it and found pictures, batteries, my mother's candles thrown all over the floor. No windows were open. The fan wasn't on. No way this stuff could have fell out of the blue. Something threw it off the dressers. We stood there, speechless, and quickly walked out of that room and locked it behind us. One morning I was up early watching TV. My grandma was in the kitchen cooking some breakfast. My parents were at work, and my sisters were still sound asleep. I was bored, so I was playing with my mum's heart monitor. I don't know what it's called, but it's a device you use to hear the baby's heartbeat in the womb. I liked to play with it because you could hear everything on it. It was so powerful you could hear the neighbors' conversation outside. I was a really nosy kid. I had the headphones on and placed the device on the floor. All I could hear was my grandma's footsteps in the kitchen. I then picked up a distant sound. I thought to myself, what could that be? It sounded like a very faint talking. My grandma is the only one awake, so out of curiosity, I started following the noise. Closely following the trail of sound, it led me upstairs. The talking started growing louder. Well, none of the rooms upstairs had a TV. Maybe it was my sister on the phone? I put the device next to her door. Nothing. Silence. I took the headphones off and proceeded to follow the talking. It was coming from my older sister's room. She had moved out a few years ago, so we used her room as a storage for our winter clothes and toys. I opened the door, and one of our old TVs with the VHS attached was turned on. The TV hadn't been used because we thought it was broken, so we just tossed it in that room with all the other junk. The TV was on the floor facing the bed, resting on the top of a pile of clothes. I walked over to see what was playing, and it was the movie Madeline. The video cassette was in the VHS, plugged in. The power button was sunk in, so I couldn't turn it off. I pulled the power cord to disconnect it and threw it in the closet. I do not condone anyone to play the Red Book game. If you do, play at your own risk. This was about 6 years ago. I used to work at a family mart in rural Tochigi, Japan. For those of you unaware, Family Mart is a popular convenience store chain, mainly here in Japan. Nestled at the edge of a quiet village, surrounded by forests and mountains, the store was a beacon for tourists and locals alike. My shifts often extended into late hours of the night, either afternoon to evening or evening to morning shifts. Prior to this, I worked days during my vacation time, but due to being a student and studying during the day, I started doing the later shifts. It worked out well for me, as the nights were quiet and I could do my homework and study in the downtime. I never noticed anything during the day shifts, but when I started working nights, especially nights alone, strange things started to happen. The first sign something was off was the incessant flickering of the store's fluorescent lights. I would replace the bulbs, but they would inexplicably go dark again, casting the store into eerie shadows. One particularly chilling night, I heard footsteps echoing through the empty aisles when I knew I was alone. Items would fall from the shelves without any explanation, and cupboards would open and close on their own. At times, I could have sworn I heard faint whispers from outside in the car park or in the staff-only areas of the store. Regulars who frequent the store that I got to know and was on speaking terms with spoke of strange occurrences too. They recounted tales of being touched when near the drink fridge at the back, drops in temperature, and seeing figures moving silently out of the corner of their eyes. Some claimed to have heard soft, sad-sounding songs drifting from the stockroom. One evening, I was restocking the shelves when I felt a sudden drop in temperature. I turned to see the figure of a woman in a kimono, standing at the end of the aisle. As I turned my gaze to her, I noticed that her face was strange. It was like it had been blurred out, all except for her dark eyes. She beckoned to me. Her voice, or what I thought was her voice, was like a soft, haunting melody. Frozen with fear, I couldn't move. It was as if time had come to a standstill. Then, in an instant, she vanished, leaving me shaken and trembling. My co-workers shared similar stories, and we began to piece together the history of the convenience store. It turned out that the land the building now stood on had once been a house that burned down, and the land was now believed to be cursed. The kimono-clad figure I had seen was rumored to be the spirit of a woman who had met a tragic end in the fire. As the months passed, the eerie occurrences continued, and my anxiety grew. I couldn't escape the feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes following my every move. Eventually, I left my job, unable to bear the unsettling presence any longer. After I finished my studies, I moved to a bigger city and a better job. To this day, I can't explain the experiences I had in that convenience store, but they serve as a reminder that some places carry a history that can never be erased. I used to work nights at 7-Eleven in countryside Saitama, Japan. I won't say exactly where, but Saitama is pretty much the same all over, just with more or less people. Being in the countryside, mine had less people, mainly nuisance biker kids stopping for cigarettes or people just heading home. But there was one customer whose memory will haunt me forever. As I said, my 7-Eleven was in the countryside, so it was basically the brightest thing as far as the eye could see at night. It was a quiet weekday night, I think Wednesday or Thursday. Working nights, I always found those 2 days tended to blur together the most. No one had come in for over an hour. I'd done all of my nighttime duties for basically the whole night. I was working alone, as I often did, since the volume of traffic at night in this location could never justify paying another person. I was lazily wiping the counter for the 3rd or 4th time that night, just listening to the cicadas and crickets outside. I was so focused on my work that I didn't even notice the figure at the window staring in. I jumped in surprise upon seeing him and did a polite nod. It was a wrinkly old man with kinda dead-looking eyes. Unusually, he did not return my greeting gesture. He just kept staring in at me. It was like 3 a.m. What was this old man who was pushing at least 75 years old, and I'm being generous here, doing out so late? It's not unheard of, I supposed, but he wasn't actually doing anything apart from staring at me. I was starting to get really creeped out. Outside the store was dark and quiet, and I hadn't seen any customers in over an hour. Actually, I hadn't even seen any cars pass the store in that long either. Then, another thought occurred to me. There were no cars in the car park. There weren't really any houses nearby either. Was this a ghost? I didn't really believe in ghosts, but I couldn't really think of anything else. But he was solid looking. The longer he stared at me, the more I felt creeped out. Actually, more than that, I was starting to panic. I came to a decision, and I'm not really proud of it. I figured if he wasn't in the store, he wasn't a customer. Therefore, wasn't my responsibility. So I pulled the blind down on the window he was staring from. My hand was shaking as I did so. I was mere centimeters away from his face. He held my gaze the whole time. He looked directly into my eyes, and I couldn't look away. The old guy didn't move, even a little. Being so close to him, I felt all the hairs on the back of my neck stand up on end, and my stomach was tying itself in knots. I did see his chest move up and down, however, so he wasn't a ghost. After I had closed the blind, I went back to the counter and stood there uneasily. I really didn't know what to do. It felt so strange just leaving him out there, but my mind was racing and I just couldn't think clearly. What was I meant to do? I even briefly considered turning the lights off, but then I snapped out of it and realized how ridiculous I was being. The creepiness of the situation had put my mind in a panic and I wasn't thinking straight. I then realized that I must go and see if he needed help. I mustered the courage, went to the front window, and raised the blinds once more. He was still there, but his eyes were somewhat bigger now. We were locked in a staring contest that I couldn't look away from. This went on for what seemed like forever. His eyes seemed to keep getting bigger too. Then, something happened to break the standoff. The old man slowly brought his head to the glass. Softly at first, but as time went on, harder and harder. Now I had to do something. I ran out and tried to stop the man. He was stronger than I expected, and he continued to hit the window with his head again and again. So I tried harder to stop him, but I didn't want to hurt him. I managed to stop him for a brief moment, and then he did the unimaginable. He started to yell. Just a continuous, unintelligible sound. The longer I held on, the louder he got until it reached a scream. This was a battle I was not going to win. I ran inside and called the police with him still bellowing outside. I tried to explain as best I could, but was extremely shaken up. Luckily, the operator could hear the screaming on the other end. The police came 15 minutes later and seemed to be familiar with the man. They calmed him down and loaded him into their patrol car. They took him away without really explaining anything to me. About half an hour later, they came back and explained to me that the old man lived in a care facility about 10 minutes away by car, which meant that it was about 30 to 40 minutes on foot for the old man. Before his mental deterioration, he actually used to live in a house where the convenience store now stood. It was sold to pay for his care, as his only living family, a son, lived and worked in Tokyo and was too busy to care for him. He actually escapes from time to time to go home and just can't understand where his house is. I left the job not long after this. I knew if it happened again, I could just call the police, but whenever I worked nights after this, I kept imagining I could see the old man. I was always on edge and very jumpy, and even started losing sleep over it. This was about 8 to 10 years back, so I'm guessing the old man has since passed on. I wonder if his spirit is still trying to go home. This happened when I was still a new hire at the company I still work for. At the time, there weren't many job opportunities in the town I lived in, not for the field I wanted work in at least. So when I saw a posting for the job I wanted, with the only drawback being that I relocate, I jumped at the chance. I didn't have much going on for me in my hometown anyways. Most of my friends had moved away after their studies and I didn't have a girlfriend or anything like that. But although I was already considering moving to another town, my plan was to move to a bigger city, not to a comparable small town. I applied anyway, thinking that I should at least try, as it was the field I wanted to work in. I ended up getting the job and moved across the country, 2 prefectures over, about 2 hours by car. The move was easy as I didn't have much to move, and the company organized my initial apartment for me with the option to find my own place once the apartment's contract was up. I had just moved in, and after spending the day unpacking and putting things away in my new home, it had gotten really late. I still hadn't had a chance to go food shopping yet, and being a more countryside town, most supermarkets were closed already. There was a drugstore about a 10 to 15 minute drive away, but I didn't really feel like driving, so I decided to walk to the nearby convenience store. It was 24 hours and would definitely have a good selection of food and drinks for my first night's meal. It was only a 10-minute walk, and I felt it would be nice to get a feel for my new neighborhood. The night was cool. It was late fall after all, but it felt crisp and refreshing to be out of the apartment. I walked for a couple of blocks before I saw the convenience store's glow. The neighborhood was dark at night, so the store's glow was a comforting sight. I walked a couple of more minutes, and I was there. I entered the store and was greeted by the store's sole employee for the night. The store was nearly empty, save for a few scattered customers and the lone cashier. I took my time picking up some snacks, a bento, and a couple of beers to celebrate. I gradually became aware that I was now the only customer. There was nothing unusual about that, but for some reason, I started to get a real feeling of unease. The quietness of the store was odd, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerators, and the lighting seemed darker for some reason. I tried to dismiss my feeling I was just being overtired due to my day and got on with what I was doing. I decided to grab some food for breakfast the next day as well and continued my shop. As I turned down the aisle containing bread, a shadowy figure caught my eye. It was a tall, indistinct silhouette, lurking just at the edge of the store towards the back in a darker corner that led to the restrooms. At first, I dismissed it as a trick of the dim lighting, or perhaps a shadow cast from outside. But then it moved, darting from the corner, then to a window, with an eerie fluidity that sent a shiver down my spine. I blinked, hoping my eyes were playing tricks on me, but the shadow persisted, hovering ominously, now just outside the store. It seemed to be watching me, and a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. Since it seemed to be outside, I was in no hurry to get to where it was, so I continued my shop, all the while keeping an eye on the shadow outside. Just as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. I pretended to shop closer to the window so I could check for it, and it was definitely gone. A shiver once again ran up my spine, and I felt the strong urge to leave and get home as soon as possible. I quickly paid for my items and mumbled a hurried farewell to the cashier, while still darting my gaze all around the store and outside. Stepping back out into the crisp night, I felt an overwhelming urge to get as far away from the convenience store as possible. Then, I noticed the shadowy figure continued to follow me, keeping pace with my every step. Panic gnawed at my insides as I walked briskly through the dimly lit streets, the chilling presence never relenting. After I got a block or so away from the convenience store, however, I could no longer see or feel the shadow's presence. I rushed home after that, continuously checking over my shoulder the whole way. I went to that convenience store plenty of times after that while I lived there, but always made sure to never go back after dark. I've been living in Japan for about 3 years. For the most part, it is a very safe place to live, but it does have more than its fair share of creeps. Like, real creeps. You wouldn't believe some of the things I've seen, but I'll just say, there is a lot of self-gratification in public. This is a story of my most traumatic run-in with a creep. For reference, I am a 27-year-old female from the United States. This happened in my first year, so I was 24 at the time. I was on my way to my classroom. I was an English teacher, like about 90% of foreigners here. I was living in a small country town in the mountains at the time. Well, small for Japan. It still had quite a lot of people living in it. It was the end of summer, so around the end of August, and it was hot. I stopped in at 7-Eleven to buy a drink and to cool down a little in the store's AC. I went towards the back of the store where the drinks were. Pretty much the same setup for all the 7-Elevens around here. When I got to the drink fridge, there was already someone standing there. At first, I thought it was just a normal shopper selecting a drink, so I stood at a polite distance to let him select. It was the height of the pandemic after all. I waited and waited, but he just didn't seem to move. Then I noticed that every once in a while, he was looking at me intently out of the corner of his eye. I didn't have time for this, and was starting to get creeper vibes from this guy. So I excused myself and opened the fridge he was standing in front of and grabbed myself a bottle of water. As I cut in front of him, I noticed he kind of leaned in, and I could hear an obvious, long drawn-in inhale. This creep was smelling me. I grabbed the closest water and rushed for the register to pay. As I was leaving, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, but fought the impulse to turn around. I got outside and continued my walk, thinking the weird encounter was over. But we all know I wouldn't be writing this if that was so. As I walked up the hill to my classroom, I heard the sound of running footsteps behind me. I didn't think too much of it. Why would someone be running up behind me after all? I didn't know anyone here. The footsteps got closer, so I moved to the side to let the runner pass. They never passed. They stopped right next to me. I looked to see who it was, thinking maybe it was a fellow teacher surprising me or even a student. I was kind of shocked when I realized who it was. It was the guy from the drink fridge in 7-Eleven. I never got a good look at him before, since I was trying to keep my distance. But now I did. There was definitely something off about him.
Konnichiwa.
He kind of mumbled out, walking uncomfortably close to me. He was tall and seemed really skinny, even for a young Japanese guy. He was all in black and with long pants and a long-sleeved t-shirt, even though it was still super hot and humid. His hair was long and over his eyes and looked poorly cared for. He was wearing a black mask, so I couldn't really see much of his face. His head was down, and he looked at me from the corner of his eye. I replied his greeting non-committedly. He then proceeded to start rapid-fire questioning me in Japanese, all in this mumbling way of speaking. Nihongo wakarimasen. I don't understand Japanese, I said to him, without really looking at him. He was really creeping me out. He hadn't done anything too bad, but he just made me feel extremely uncomfortable.
Where are you from?
He mumbled out. America, I replied quickly. This guy made me really uncomfortable, so I kept my answers very short. He asked me a few more basic questions in English, and then mumbled out.
Where do you live?
Sorry, no, I'm not telling you that.
Why?
He asked, somewhat taken aback.
We are a couple now.
What? He then reached out to try and hold my hand. His fingers were long and skinny with unkempt nails that were also long and dirty. His hand was sticky from the filth covering it, and would have been even more so due to the heat. I quickly withdrew my hand in disgust. Where he touched it felt so gross, like I had touched the inside of a trash can left out in the heat. Even though I was extremely freaked out at this point, I still didn't want to make a scene. Plus, it was a country town, so there wasn't really many people around to help me at that time of day. I started speed walking away from him as fast as I could. He made a confused noise and tried to keep up. We came to a set of traffic lights. The pedestrian cross sign was red, but there were no cars and I was trying to escape this guy, so I just crossed. Then the strangest thing happened. I heard a kind of strangled cry from behind me from the strange guy. I took a quick look over my shoulder, and I swear I'm not making this up. He had stopped at the red light and looked visibly shocked and worried. He was pacing back and forth like he didn't know how to cross. I knew that jaywalking was frowned upon in Japan, but I didn't know it was like this. I knew the red light wouldn't hold him for long, so I took off running to my classroom. Luckily, it wasn't too far away, and creepy didn't seem to be a runner, so I managed to lose him. I got to my classroom, quickly unlocked the door, and kept the blinds closed. It seemed as though I had lost him. I taught all of my classes for the night, 3 in total. Basically, I work at what is called an eikaiwa here. That is an after-school English conversation school for kids 3 to 18 years old. So I teach one lesson for about an hour and have 15 minutes in between to send the students off, speak to their parents, and greet the next class. Each time I went outside to speak to the parents and send the students off, I had the feeling I was being watched. I figured I was just paranoid but couldn't shake the feeling. When I finished for the day, I closed up and waited inside the classroom, which is basically a storefront, not an actual school, peering out from behind the blinds. I had all the lights off and just waited. The plan was to wait 15 minutes to be sure no one was out there. I didn't really have plans after work and figured if he was there, he would think I exited a different way if the lights were off for that long and no one came out. Sure enough, after 10 minutes, there he was. He had been hiding around the corner. I had no idea what my next move should be. In any other country, I could just call the cops, but Japan is known to ignore stalkers unless something actually happens, especially if the victim is a foreigner. I know this from stories of friends being stalked. Plus, I couldn't speak Japanese. My company's office was closed, so I couldn't call them for help. So I just planned to stay overnight in the classroom at worst, or until there was no chance of him being there. I finished my classes at 8:30, closed everything up by 9:15, and waited until 11:30 p.m. I just couldn't take it anymore. I was as stealthy as I could be leaving. I took a different route home, which was longer. I ended up getting back home by about 12:15-ish. I lived in the same town about 20 minutes away on foot, usually. Luckily, my gamble turned out good because I didn't see him on the way home. I called in sick the next day and spoke to my supervisor about transferring to a different location. Luckily, there was a teacher who had left recently, and their apartment and unit of classrooms was open, so I was set to transfer in a week. My supervisor was very kind and agreed police wouldn't do much, so he pushed to get it done as soon as possible. He even offered for me to take paid vacation until the move. I was on high alert for that week, but I made it through without any further run-ins. My company made sure to put a male teacher in that area after that. So, yeah, Japan isn't always the safest country everyone thinks it is. It's just that crimes like these don't really get reported or dealt with by authorities. This happened several years back. The night was darker than usual, and I was making my way along a desolate stretch of highway, far away from city lights. The only sources of light being my headlights cutting through the night. There were no stars that night, and barely any moon due to the clouds. As I approached a particularly remote section of the highway, sipping my coffee and listening to a podcast, something caught my eye. A figure, barely discernible in the weak glow of my headlights, was walking along the edge of the road. It appeared to be a woman in a dress totally not suited to the season or predicament. She was also barefoot. My heart skipped a beat. This was the last place I'd expected a pedestrian to be, especially at this late hour, so far away from anything even close to civilization. I couldn't help but to feel apprehension and a sense of responsibility. It wasn't safe for anyone to be walking along this pitch-black highway. And why would anyone be? For sure, they must need some kind of help. I signaled and pulled my truck to a halt on the shoulder. I climbed out of the cabin. The cold night air was biting. As I approached the spot where I'd seen the figure, a strange chill crept down my spine. There was no one there. I scanned the area with my flashlight, but the road was empty, and the only sounds were the distant hum of the engine and the chirping of crickets. What the hell was going on? I couldn't have imagined the figure. It had been so distinct. I called out into the darkness, asking if anyone needed assistance. But there was no response, only an eerie silence that hung heavily in the air. Feeling uneasy, I returned to my truck and waited in it, looking around, trying to decide what to do before just continuing down the highway. Who was that woman? And where had she gone so suddenly? When I stopped at a nearby truck stop to take a break, I decided to ask the waitress in the diner there about the area. With a knowing look, she told me the story of a woman who had met her tragic end in a traffic accident on that very stretch of highway years ago. Her restless spirit was said to appear to travelers at night from time to time, though she herself had never seen her. Not the only strange thing that has happened to me out on the open road, but definitely the creepiest.
I'm not a trucker myself, but my uncle is. We were chatting at a family barbecue recently. He's a bit of a storyteller when he drinks, so I asked him if he had any creepy things happen while driving, since I love listening to trucker stories. He told me this story, and I asked if I could write it down and share it. This is written down from memory, not long after he told me, so it's basically his words. Here goes. I've seen plenty of strange and creepy things during my years as a long-haul trucker. Some you wouldn't even believe. Hell, I don't even believe most of them, and put them down as hallucinations from sleep deprivation. But the creepiest for me wasn't some ghost on the side of the road. It wasn't some possible cryptid running along my truck. It was another human. Well, physically anyway. I was driving on a lonely, desolate stretch of highway. It was a moonless night. All I had with me for company was my engine's hum and the long road ahead. It was really dark outside, and the only light was from the truck's headlights cutting through the night. I'd been driving for about 2 hours in this stage. I turned a corner and my headlight showed something strange up ahead. There was a person hunched over in the middle of the road. I quickly hit the brakes, making my truck screech to a stop. My heart was racing as I looked through the windshield, trying to understand what was going on. It was a man, hunched over something on the road. He looked messy and with wet and dirty clothes. What caught my eyes were he was tearing at what seemed to be an animal that was hit by a car. My headlights showed all the horrible details. The man was tearing into a deer's stomach that was still laying still in the ground. It was obviously roadkill, and he was tearing into it with his hands and teeth, and bringing the still dripping meat to his mouth and eating it. His hands and face were covered with dark, wet stains. The smell was awful, like death was right there. What the was all I managed to get out before my gag reflex kicked in. I was really scared and grossed out. Like, what kind of person does this? Was he a threat? Was he all there mentally? Not knowing what else to do, I grabbed my phone to call 911. The person on the other end sounded like they didn't believe me at first, but concerned when it became more apparent that I was telling the truth. They said help was coming and told me to stay in my truck. While I waited, I couldn't stop looking at the man. He just kept eating, not noticing the police sirens coming closer. It felt like forever, minutes dragging on, and I can't even begin to describe how sick and unnerved I felt. When the police got there, they went up to the man, and it was like he suddenly woke up from a weird trance. They took him away and asked me a lot of questions about what I had seen. They let me go after that, and I had no idea what had happened to the man. I never got a follow-up. I'm guessing he had some kind of mental problem, but who really knows? After that, I kept driving, but I couldn't forget that strange and creepy moment. The sight of the flesh and the gore was in my head for some time after. In fact, I couldn't stand the sight of raw meat for a while, but thankfully it had passed. While my life was never in danger, it still was one of the scariest things I've ever seen. I hope the man got the help he clearly needed in the end.
As an interstate truck driver with over 2 decades of experience under my belt, I thought I had seen it all in the long stretches of road between the main cities of Australia. But one fateful night, as I traversed the desolate long stretch between Adelaide and Perth, I encountered something that defied all logic, and I still can't come to terms with to this day. The night was clear, the sky dark and unending. The stars glimmered brilliantly overhead. You never truly appreciate how many stars there are until you see the night sky clear from any city. As my truck rumbled along the lonely highway, I noticed a set of oddly colored lights in the sky, bigger and brighter than the rest. At first, I dismissed them as planes or satellites, but as I carried on, the lights seemed to draw closer, matching the speed and trajectory of my truck. A pang of anxiety hit me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they were following me. Minutes felt like hours as the lights maintained their relentless pursuit. My heart raced, and a sense of dread settled in the pit of my stomach. There was no way of escaping them, and I was already putting myself at risk driving under such conditions with the heavy load I was transporting. So I pulled over to the side of the highway. I reached for my radio, intending to call for help or report the strange phenomenon. But all that came through was aggressive static. That's the best way I can describe it anyway. The lights continued their eerie dance in the night sky, their glow flickering and pulsating in some kind of rhythm. The minutes crawled by as I struggled to comprehend what I was seeing. Were these lights a mere illusion, or had I been a witness to something extraterrestrial? Eventually the lights faded into the distance, leaving me in the dark expanse of the open road once more. Then I noticed something even more unsettling. The clock displayed on my dashboard read 3:42 a.m. The last time I had looked at it, it had said 12:05 a.m. Hours had seemingly vanished in what seemed like no more than 10 minutes. My memory was a haze, and I couldn't recall anything specific during that missing time. Hell, I couldn't even recall time being missing. I took some time to get my nerves back under control. I was shaking like a leaf after such a weird encounter, and was having a hard time distinguishing my imagination from reality. Eventually the adrenaline crashed, and I had a quick nap for safety. I didn't even care if it was going to throw my schedule out. For the rest of the night, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease and a sense of vulnerability, unsure what exactly had happened, but knowing it was anything but normal. When I reached my destination, I relayed my experience to another trucker there who was taking a short break before heading back out. He told me that many others had also had very similar experiences, and that I did the right thing to pull over like that. As a seasoned trucker, I have faced countless challenges on the road. But that night's encounter I just can't explain. The lights and the missing time will always haunt my memory and serve as a reminder that the unexplained lurks in the vast, open expanses of the Australian highways.
This is the story of the scariest thing that's ever happened to me while on the road. Maybe not as scary as some of the stories you may hear, but it certainly shook me up, and was a situation I've never heard from any other drivers. Here goes. It was a warm summer night. It wasn't super hot, so I had my windows down enjoying the cool night breeze. The road stretched long and seemed to never end as I drove through the night. I'm a long-distance trucker who drives a lot, so I'm more than used to the quiet and being alone on the road. But this night with the moon low in the sky just felt different, as I was on edge without knowing why. I'd been driving for a good couple hours, outside was dark, and my headlights were the only thing cutting through the night. As I went around a curve in the road, I noticed a tiny bit of movement in my side mirror. I squinted trying to figure out what I was seeing. There, holding onto the side of my trailer was a dark figure. My heart raced as I tried to understand what I was seeing. I hadn't stopped for anyone, and I was sure no one got on while I was parked before. Panic hit me when I realized that there was someone on my truck who wasn't supposed to be there. I grabbed my radio, my voice shaking as I called for help from the nearest police. The person on the other end said help was coming and I should stay in my truck. I was shaken and confused, not knowing what to do. I had no idea what this person's intentions were, or if they had a weapon or not to mention the extreme risk in their own injury if they fell. If that happened, I would feel somewhat responsible. The person clung onto the side of my trailer, a dark shape against the black night. I couldn't see their face, but I felt their presence, making the highway feel even more uneasy. With every mile, my fear grew, and I watched with dread as they got closer to the cabin. Then thankfully saw the flashing red and blue approaching. When the police sirens got louder, the person seemed to realize that they were coming for them. Suddenly, they climbed onto the roof of my trailer, vanishing from my sight. I was terrified and helpless just watching. The police came fast, instructing me to pull over slowly and telling me to stay inside. They surrounded my truck, and I could only watch as they climbed onto my trailer, ready for anything, trying to find the mystery person. Time dragged on and tension heavy in the air. Finally, they caught the person. It was a messy and scared-looking person who had hitched a ride without me knowing. I didn't know why they did it, but it was clear to me we were both in big danger. They didn't have any weapons on them, and it didn't seem that their intentions for me were bad or anything. As the police took the person away from my truck, I let out a sigh of relief, thankful to be safe from that terrifying experience. It was a reminder of how a dark highway can hold unexpected dangers, hopefully for my stowaway too.
Working as a truck driver, I've had my fair share of weird and spooky experiences, like randomly smelling plumeria, or a large piece of white fabric hanging on a tree. However, nothing is as terrifying compared to the particular experience I'm about to share with you. I've been working as a truck driver for over 10 years. Never in that 10 years I was in a situation where I was truly scared for my life, until 2 months ago. I usually start my drive around 8:30 p.m, right when the traffic heading out from Kuala Lumpur City eases. My trip that night was a fairly short one. I was doing delivery and pickup in a city named Kuantan that was only around 3 hours away from Kuala Lumpur. My journey to Kuantan was smooth as can be. I arrived just before midnight. The staff were already waiting for me at the drop-off bay. I've been doing deliveries for the factory for so long that I developed friendship with the night staff. Coffee? Azman, the supervisor, said to me as soon as I got off my truck. In his hand was a hot cup of coffee. "You're a lifesaver, man." I smiled at Azman as I took the cup from his hand. We had small talk about life and work as we unloaded the truck. Nothing was out of the ordinary, until one of the new staff opened his big mouth. "So, are you going back to Kuala Lumpur right after this?" His question started off innocent. "No, I have to pick up at another location," I answered, unsuspecting of what he was going to say next. "You were taking the Karak Expressway, right?" From the tone of his voice, I knew what he was about to say next was not going to be good. Karak Expressway is famous for being haunted, despite being one of the busiest expressways in peninsular Malaysia. From the legendary yellow Volkswagen, to the haunted R&R spot at Genting Sempa, to the accident that shook the country in the 1990s when a tour bus collided with a Federal Reserve unit vehicle and about 10 civilian cars. As many as 17 people were killed, and since then, there have been many stories about the ghosts of the victims wandering around the collision area.
You better not.
Azman warned. Everyone knows speaking about supernatural things late at night is never a good thing. Still, curiosity got the best of him. I just want to know if you ever met the infamous yellow Volkswagen. That's just urban legend. I've been doing this for about a decade and nothing like that has ever happened. People are scarier. This one time, a group of people tried to mug me. I proceeded to tell him about the time I almost got robbed on a quiet road at night. That surely distracted him from his original question. It took less than an hour to unload my truck. Without wasting much time, I made my way to the pickup location. The load was not nearly as much as my drop-off, so by 1:30 a.m. I was already making my way back to Kuala Lumpur. I could not be happier. The trip went so smoothly that I was ahead of schedule. On my way back, the road was deserted. Every now and then, another vehicle would pass by my truck. The streetlights dimly illuminate the road. Thick rain clouds were blocking the moon, making the night darker. The cold and dense air entered my truck from my open window, creating my perfect setting for a good slumber. I reached out to the radio and increased the volume. I knew the loud music will keep me from getting sleepy. It's a trait of mine I learned soon after working as a truck driver. Minutes after I got to the Karak Expressway, raindrops started hitting my windshield. Only then I rolled my window up and turned on the air conditioner. The rain picked up soon after and limited my vision, so I started to slow down. That's when I realized that my truck was the only vehicle on the road. An eerie feeling crept into my heart. It was not rare for me to be in this situation, but still, I could not shake off the bad feeling. Out of nowhere, fog filled the air. That's when I saw it. Two faintly glowing red dots ahead of me. As you can tell, they were the taillights of another vehicle. I could not see the vehicle due to the rain and fog. I could just see the taillights that were getting closer and closer by the second. Slowly, my headlights reached the vehicle in front of me. The color yellow started to bleed from behind the darkness. It didn't take me long to realize the make of the car. It was a Volkswagen Beetle. You would have thought that finally seeing another vehicle on the road with me would ease the eerie feeling I had. On the contrary, my mind snapped onto the question Azman's new staff asked me hours ago. The heavy feeling I had in my heart sent me into a slight panic, but the voice of reason made me chuckle a little. It's just a coincidence, I whispered to myself, trying not to let fear take over me. The yellow Volkswagen Beetle in front of me was driving unbearably slow, prompting me to overtake it. Normally I would have lasted a bit longer driving behind an annoyingly slow vehicle, but the bad feeling I had made me want to get out of there as soon as I could. I turned on my signal, sped up and switched lanes. Because of the height of my truck, the yellow Volkswagen was almost completely in my blind spot. Overtaking the car was too easy. In moments, I saw the flickering headlight of the Beetle fade in my rearview mirror. I breathed a sigh of relief. Not sure why. Once again, I found myself alone on the road. This time, I was driving a little faster. Maybe because I was not as focused on my driving, but by the time I noticed it, a vehicle was just about 4 meters in front of my truck, and I was closing the gap faster than what I was comfortable with. Driving a truck as big as mine, even in a perfect condition, would still spell trouble for me to be approaching a vehicle that fast. I carefully step on the brakes to slow my truck just a little so I can switch lanes without swiping the car in front of me. As I stared at the car that came out of nowhere, it hit me. It was another yellow Volkswagen Beetle. At that point, I was starting to freak out. I sped up once more while trying to tell myself it was just a coincidence that I came across a yellow Volkswagen Beetle just minutes after another. I glanced at my rearview mirror. The headlights of the Beetle had already disappeared from my view. When my eyes moved to the road in front of me, I saw the now familiar taillights in front of me. Please be a different car. A different color would be fine. Just be different, I said to whoever was listening. When I got close enough, my heart sank. It was a yellow Volkswagen Beetle. The closer I got, the slower the car got. I quickly switched lanes and sped up. I was already driving faster than what would be considered safe for a truck on a rainy night, but I didn't care. All I was focusing on was outrunning the yellow Volkswagen. Unexpectedly, this time, the yellow Volkswagen matched my speed. No matter how much I accelerated, the Beetle remained next to my truck. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably no more than 5 to 10 seconds at best. The Beetle was starting to slow down enough that I could see it fully in my side mirror. That was when I saw it, or rather, I didn't see. I didn't see a driver in the driver's seat. The car was empty. There was no driver, no passenger, nobody. I was petrified. I could not look away from the yellow Beetle despite my senses screaming at me to look in front of me at the road. There was still a part of me that knew if I didn't snap out of it at that moment, it would not end well for me. That I was driving too fast. Still, I could not bring myself to look away. Like I was paralyzed. That was until a loud blaring horn made me jolt. Another trucker, heading to the direction I came from, just honked at me. It is a thing that we do here. Truckers honk when they pass by each other, as a way to say hi and also as a wake-up call, as we often get sleepy, especially on our night runs. The jolt saved my life. When I looked in front of me, I was moving at a dangerous speed and was so close to driving into the road divider. I gathered myself and brought my truck down to a reasonable speed, despite being on the verge of a panic attack. I came down with a fever the next day and was out of commission for a few days. If it was not because I am my family's sole breadwinner and actually like my job, I would have quit being a truck driver.
I've been driving trucks for years. I've seen a lot, but there is one memory that I just can't get out of my head and haunts me to this day. It happened back when I first started doing longer runs, many years back. The night was dark and the thick clouds covering the sky. I'd been driving for 4 hours and the only company I had was the hum of the engine and the radio. The highway seemed to go on forever, through remote, lonely areas. Although I knew my route well, this night felt different, making me uneasy. As I drove into the darkness, my headlights revealed an unnerving sight. A weirdly moving figure emerged from the shadows by the road. My heart raced as it became clear in the truck's headlights. It was a person, or at least it appeared to be. The way they moved was unnatural, a disjointed gait that made me feel sick to my stomach. Their clothing was tattered and filthy, and their head hung low, concealing their face behind unkempt hair. I instinctively slowed down. My initial concern was for their well-being, giving way to the growing sense of dread. This wasn't right. What was someone doing out here in the middle of nowhere, especially in the dead of night? As I approached, I reached for my CB radio, more out of reflex because my mind just couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. But before I could use it, the person abruptly turned and faced my truck, revealing a face twisted in a grotesque, unnatural grin. Their eyes glowed with an eerie light that sent a shiver down my spine. I hit the brakes, and when I looked again, they were gone, as if they were never there. Terrified and confused, I just drove away. I couldn't get that image out of my head and saw that face every time I closed my eyes for months after. What was that thing on an empty highway that night?
My encounters happened early 2020. Both happened within 2 months. I'm working as a trailer truck driver at one of the container ports in northern Malaysia. I usually work 12-hour shifts. My job is mostly moving the containers from freight trains to blocks within the port. The train station was a short distance from the port. The first incident happened around 3:30 a.m. At that time, my friends and I had just finished moving the goods containers for the time being. There was still some time until the next train arrived, so we decided to take a quick nap. I parked my truck near the train tracks. To my left was a massive flat area where the containers were arranged, waiting for customs inspection, and the train track was to my right. On the other side of the train track was the highway. My friends decided to nap near the office area, which was about 200 meters from where I was. So it was just me and the crane operator, who was around 10 meters away from me. Despite that, I was comfortable, since I am used to it, and also because the area was brightly lit from the streetlight. The particular stretch of highway is famous amongst motorbike street racers, racing illegally during the weekends. Because of this, there have been countless fatal accidents involving them. Even just recently, when I was taking a nap while waiting for the next train to arrive, I was woken up by a horrible crashing sound. An illegal street racer on a motorcycle had crashed into a car, hitting the car from the back. The people in the car were unharmed. However, the racer died at the scene. The authorities had put up a warning sign to warn users that it is a fatal accident area, but it doesn't seem to mean anything to the illegal street racers. The incident I am about to tell happened on a weekend night. Right around midnight, the street racers started to show up. It was busy with the illegal street race for a while. Luckily, nobody got into an accident. As usual, after 3 o'clock in the morning, the highway became dead again. Oddly enough, that night, I didn't feel sleepy at all, so I can confidently say what happened was not a nightmare. I lit up a cigarette and stared into the empty highway as I listened to some songs on my phone. After a while, a motorcyclist riding a Honda EX5 came into view. Unlike the usual scene, this person was riding extra slow, and from the way his body was leaning to the front, it gave me the impression that his motorbike felt heavy, like he was struggling to move due to a heavy load. My heart started beating faster as the motorcyclist got closer. When he was about 20 meters away from where I was parked, I could see someone, or rather something, squatting in the passenger seat of his motorbike. It did not look human at all. Whatever it was, it had a really freakishly long skinny neck and an abnormally long tongue that fell out of his gaping mouth onto the guy's helmet. The tip of the creature's tongue was dangling and flapping away in front of the motorcyclist's face. I was so terrified that I started praying. I had goosebumps all over my body. Until today, I wonder what happened to the guy. Did he take the creature home? Poor guy. The second incident happened just 2 months ago, around the same time, between 3 to 4 o'clock in the morning. Most of the areas at the port are super quiet around this time, except of course in an area where a ship had just docked. However, the rows of goods containers stacked so high, separating one area to another, makes the next area dead quiet, and the shadows from these containers make the areas a lot darker despite the multiple lights installed in each area. That night, I was assigned to unload a ship. After my load was hooked up to my trailer truck, I drove to the designated row where the container will be stored temporarily, waiting for customs inspection. Out of nowhere, a tall black figure appeared just a few meters from my truck. Despite my headlights shining directly on it, all I could see was a pitch black silhouette, and this was not like the tallest living person kind of height. My truck is around 10 feet high, and this black figure was easily 15 feet tall. You may or may not know, trucks, especially as large as the one I drove, could not stop abruptly, so I had no option but to run over whatever creature it was in front of me. I didn't know what I was expecting, but when my truck was supposed to make contact with the figure, it just disappeared into thin air.